Hello everybody, today we're going to be doing the fourth chapter, or starting the fourth chapter of De Primo Principio. We're only going to be doing conclusions 1 through 3 today because conclusion 4 is about 4 or 5 pages long in the text. So we're going to stick to just conclusions 1 through 3. Okay, first, conclusion 1. The first being has no essential parts. Now, this is to say that the first being can't have parts that are predicated of it as a this. It can't be like the kind of thing it is. If you watch my other videos on the isogogy, this is the stuff predicated in quid, or the genus, or species. Yeah. There cannot be two parts that each have necessity of themselves. You can derive a parallel argument from the chapter 3, conclusion 6, because then you would have two things that have necessity of themselves, which is impossible. And if there are parts that are necessary and parts that are not necessary, then the whole being is not necessary but contingent. But the whole being is necessary, so there is only one essential part. Then we have the second half of conclusion 1. Corollary, the first being is not in a genus, for being in a genus requires essential composition of genus and difference. But, there is no essential composition in God, therefore God is not in a genus. Then we have an objection to this argument. If every essential part must be the same part, then there can't be anything in God that is formally distinct. This is to say that the formal distinction doesn't exist within God because everything in God has to be identical to the part of God which has necessity of itself. The reply is simply that the formal distinction doesn't cause composition, so there's no problems. Everything is identical to that part. That part just has multiple aspects. But none of them create composition. None of them are parts. There's only one part in God, which is the whole. Conclusion number 2. Whatever is in the first being is present to the highest degree. This is pretty simple. Anything in the nature is identical to it, being formally distinct at most. The first nature is supreme, or the most perfect it could be. This is because it's the first being in the order of eminence, so it's the first being in the order of perfection. Therefore, anything in the first being is as perfect as it can be, because it's all identical to being the most perfect being. And then in conclusion 3, every pure perfection is predicated to the supreme nature as being present necessarily and in the highest degree. This is simply that the first being has some set of perfections. The first nature has everything that it has to the highest degree. Therefore, the first being has all of its perfections to the highest degree. Pure perfections are perfections that are absolutely better to have than not to have. These are things that it's essentially a name for the list of attributes that God has, because God is the most perfect being, so everything that he has is the most perfect. Now, the exact list of perfections present here, other than having necessary existence, so far at least, is left unenumerated. Scotus will talk about more about simplicity and more about the divine intellect and the divine will a little bit later. But yeah, and that'll be all for this episode.